Vayechi Yudal Tevis Tafshin Chafhei. In this week's parsha, it says, "Vayikra Ya'akov el Banav." Yaakov called to his children, and Ve'yomer, and he told them, "Hey, Asfu, gather, Vagidah lachem, and I will tell you, what will happen in the end of days." Well, Pirsha Rabbi Seinu Zal, and the Chazal explained, Bikish Yaakov legalos Banav Ketz Hayamin, that Yaakov wanted to reveal to his children, to his sons, the end of days, meaning when Mashiach would come, which is the expression used in Daniel. Ketz Hayamin is Aramaic instead of Yomim, and the Shechina departed from him. That this is also in Rashi's explanation. In addition, what the Rashi writes at the beginning of our parsha, in yesterday's Chumash, Lama Parsha Zustumachulu, why is this parsha, when it's written in the Sefer Torah, there's no space whatsoever between the last word of the previous parsha and the first word of this parsha, which usually in all the parshas in the Sefer Torah, the new Sedra always has some type of amount of space. This had no space. It's just one long line without any break in it. So Rashi explains, why is it closed? That's what it's called. It's closed. It doesn't have an open break. That Yaakov wanted to reveal the end to his children of Anistar and Manu. It was closed off from him. In the beginning of Parshas Vayechi, it's only brought down as a by the way. Why is this parsha, closed? But that's not. Here's not the beginning of the parsha. Is not the main place where this matters. But Moisef Mevayer Beprotis Yoserim Kaimai Ikri. Rashi adds and explains more in detail in its primary place, which is the primary place by the brachas, right before the brachas of Yaakov to his children, Bepirush HaKosav Agaida Lachem, where it says towards the end of the parsha, and I will tell you. So over there, Rashi explains, just like the Chazal say, Vagidah Lachem, mean that Yikra Eschem Mechach Seyamim, that he wanted to reveal to them the end of times. And that Rashi says, quote, line 10, Bikish Legal Saketz V'nistalchem and Shechina, he wanted to reveal the end of times, and the Shechina left him. He started going on to other topics, like the Yaakov was going on to the brachas and so on. So the Rebbe says, we could say, that this idea that he wanted to reveal the end, move on that specifically it uses the expression of Hagoda, Agida lachem. Usually in Chumash it says Vayidaber, it says Vayomer. Haggadah is not that often used. Dafke, that specific language is where the Chachamim have derived that it had to do with the end of days. Even though it says Ba'achris Hayamim could also mean what will happen over time throughout history, which Yaakov did hint at events that would take place with the Shvatim over history. But specifically the additional phrasing Agida, as the Maimer is going to speak a lot about, is hinting at things having to do with concealment and Mashiach's times and so on. Ois Beis, line 14. By prefacing what's explained in one of the manuscripts of writings of the Rabbeim that recently left their imprisonment to freedom. It wasn't just that the Sfarim on Hey Tevis were considered a case of Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming captives, like we know the Rebbe spoke about, but also when there were books trapped behind the Iron Curtain and they finally got out, the Rebbe also called it Sifrei Chassidus that belonged to the Rabbeim. They also called it going out from imprisonment. Skip the parentheses to line 16. When it comes to talking and speaking, there are three expressions usually used in Torah. Dibur, speaking, va'amira, saying, v'hagoda, relating or telling. V'amr b'zoyar, and the Zoyar says about this, shezel klal, this is a rule, it's a principle. Shekol makim shenamar l'shoin hagoda, wherever it uses the expression hagoda, as opposed to dibur or amira, who milin de chachmasa, they are matters, words of wisdom. The Rebbe says in the brackets to note Shehagoda hu gam l'shoin hamshacha. Hagoda is also from the word drawing, moving forward, coming down. Kemoi nahar din nur de nogid chulu. In the Nile, there's an expression, a river of fire that just goes on. What does that mean in the idea of milin de chachmasa that the Zohar says? When it says the expression of Haggadah, it means drawing down a matter from its root and its source. That's the idea that the expression of Haggadah are words of Chachma. It's the idea of drawing down wisdom from its root and its source. So that's why the Zohar, that's the support and explanation for the Zohar of why specifically the terminology of Haggadah indicates matters of wisdom. And this idea that matters of wisdom are something that have to be drawn down from its source is also hinted in another pasuk. This is also what it says, Hamagid Mereishis Achris. The simple meaning is, he relates, he tells, Hashem tells at the beginning what's going to be at the end. But here he uses it from the word drawing down. Shu inyan hamshacha, magid. It's the idea of drawing down, which we said magid shows I'm drawing down. Mibchinas hachachma, from the level of wisdom, which is reishis. As we know, it says reishis chachma. Chachma is the level of beginning. Lebechinas hamalchus, to the sphere of malchus, which is achris. It's the last, it's the final of the 10 spheres. So the Zohar brings a proof that Agida means matters of wisdom. Varayi Yaakov. The proof of it is that from Yaakov. She'amar Labanov. I don't remember for sure if the Zohar says that's a proof, or the others say that's a proof. The Mamorim say it's a proof. That Yaakov, the proof is from Yaakov. She'amar Labanov, he's told his children, Va'agida lachem goymer, and I will tell you. So V'amar Rabbeinu Zal, and our Chazal said, that the Yaakov Avinu wanted to reveal to them, to his children, the end of times. It doesn't say Vayomer, it doesn't say Vayidaber, it says specifically an expression of Haggadah. So that fits. And for that the Zohar says, this matter of revealing the end of times, that's like from the highest levels, Magid Mereshis, it's the true wisdom, the true matters of wisdom. And they said in the Zohar, the Zohar explains what is actually the reason, what's the significance that's connected with this word, not just a proof that it's so, but what is it about the word of Haggadah that indicates that it's matters of wisdom? In the word, and I will tell, and I will relate, there's the letters of Gimel and Daled right in the middle. We'll soon talk about the Yud. Shuhu Goimel Dalim. We know the famous Maimer Chazal brought down in the Basel Ganim Amorim that when you have the two letters Gimel Daled together, that stands for Goimel. Gimel from the word Goimel, doing acts of kindness like Mils Chasadim. Dalim, the Dalet stands for Dalim, or even Dalet hasn't it the word Dal, meaning the poor people, which is essentially the concept L'shoin Hashpa. That's a language indicating of giving something over. Therefore, doing acts of kindness begins with the letter Gimel, because that's the idea of Gimel Chasadim, means you're giving, you're transmitting something. Geula, redemption is also about Hashem's hashpa of goodness to this world and godly revelation to this world. So it also begins with the letter Gimel. And it also says, that the kindness of Hashem, like upon everything that He was giving us, but also Gimalanu indicates Gimel. So you see that Gimalanu, from the word Gimel, and the word Gimel, so the word Gimalanu, that's idea of chesed, of giving, of hashpah. As opposed to that, Gimel, goes to the Dalet. V'Dalet hu b'chinas makabel. Dalet is the receiver. Shazel Shamar David. That's what David HaMelech said. Daloisi v'liyoshiyam. I've been poor, and to me he has saved. Like it says, Ki ani ve'evin ani, because I am poor and I'm a pauper. How come? Why is David HaMelech identified with a makabel, a receiver, and poverty? Ki sira, because the moon, which is Spheres HaMalchus, the moon has to do with the sphere of Malchus, because the sun is the spheres above Malchus, and the moon receives from the sun. The same thing, Malchus receives from the spheres above. And we know the spheres of Malchus has to do with Madregas David. David is David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. He's the level of spheres of Malchus. Less law megar maklum. The level of Malchus has nothing of its own, and therefore he is called Dal. Therefore, David has said about himself, I am poor, I am Dal. There's a very interesting thing also brought down in Maimon Chazal, that David HaMelech did not even have his own years. He said he was, the Adam Rishon saw that he was going to be stillborn, and he gave him 70 years of his own life. That's why Adam Rishon did not live 1,000 years. He lived only 930 years, because 70 years he gave to the David HaMelech, which is how many years he lived. So even in his life, he was a person that was poor and needed something else to be mashpia to him. So David represents the idea of Dalus, the receiver. So that's the Gimel Dalet. Gimel Dalet shows on the Ashpa. But right in the middle of the Gimel Dalet, in Va'agida, there's the letter Yud. So he says in line 17, Va'yud Va'agida b'chinas yisoid ha'mashpia. The Yud of the word Agida is the level of Yisoid. The sphere of Yisoid comes right before Spheres HaMalchus. It's the connector sphere. It like connects all the spheres above and transmits to Malchus. It's the mashpia. Yisoid has to do with mashpia. That's why Agida indicates on words of wisdom, because we're talking about drawing down and being mashpia, wisdom from upon high to below. That's what Yaakov said to his children. I will tell you, it's matters of wisdom. That Maimer that the Rebbe quoted from continues to explain in Torah itself there is Agadata part of Torah, the Agada part of Torah, the parts of Torah that are more ethical teachings, the parts that's known as printed in Ein Yaakov, all the different stories of the Gemara and all the different ethical and teachings about how one needs to comport themselves, not the legalistic part that deals with different halachas of how we keep Shabbos and kosher and what to do if my ox gores someone else's cow, etc. But the Agadah Shabbat are Agadah. Again, Agadata is related to the Agida. They are in Milan de Chachmasa, even more Milan de Chachmasa matters of and words of wisdom. Why is that so? Because the Agadah Shabbat Torah, she bechinas pnimius Torah, it's the inner part of the Torah, vadle rozen, the rozen, until the secrets of the Torah, she bechinas stimma, the whole stimmin, that they are the concealed of all things that are concealed. And this fits in with what the Chazal said about the Agadah of the Torah. This is what our Chazal said. If you wish to recognize the one who said, and the world was created, in other words, if you want to recognize and see Hashem, lemoid Haggadah, study Haggadah, because from studying Haggadah, that's how you recognize Hashem. Haggadah indicates the innermost level of the Torah. This is the Milan de Chachmasa, the most concealed and innermost part. 2 lines from the bottom of the page, the beginning of the wide lines. The idea behind this is, he's now going to contrast in actual meaning of the words Dibur and Amira, how it's different than the Agida when it comes to a person. When a person speaks or a person says, when he uses the word Dibur, uses the word Amira, it's different than Agadah. The idea behind this is amongst the differences between speech and saying and telling, When a person speaks or a person says something, in other words, those two expressions, dibur and amira, it's possible to be from the external part of the soul. Ki hadibur shuhu bapeh, because the speech, which is to speak, one uses one's mouth, yachalias ba'ifin can be in such a manner of echad bapeh v'echad balev. There's an expression about someone that is not completely honest in his speech. The expression that the Chazal use is one. In other words, he says one thing with his mouth and one in his heart, and he's completely different in his heart. So we see how speech is not necessarily reflective of what's going on inside of me. It's only an external thing. It's something that I'm speaking. It's not what I really mean. Even saying, which we know there's an expression, Vayomer Hashem al liboy. There's an expression where a person could say to themselves. So we find that the word amira can, as opposed to dibur, can refer to an internal thought. So if it refers to an internal thought, perhaps that's more, that's not chitzonius hanefesh, that's not the external part of the soul. So the Rebbe says, no, even what I consciously think can be not exactly what I want. Yichoylali is hepech pnimius hanefesh, can be the opposite of the inner part of his soul. It could be the opposite of his true will. So the Rebbe is going to bring over here in the brackets a proof. How is it possible that a person could even think, amira, something that's not what he really is at? And he brings a famous example that the Rebbe always brings, that the Rambam says there are certain occasions where we can coerce someone to do something, even though that to do certain things, like giving a get, a release for a servant, etc., must be done willingly. And the Rambam says we coerce him until he says, Roitzani, I want. How come? He's just saying it. So the Rambam says, deep down, every Yid wants to do what Hashem wants. So therefore, since deep down every Yid wants to do what Hashem wants, so the coercion is only to remove the blockage that's in between his mouth and the deep down. But the main point that the Rebbe wants to bring out over here is that you could see his real will is that every Yid wants to fulfill what Hashem wants him to do. But in his conscious mind, at least before he's coerced, he says, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. It's not just what he's saying, it's his amira also, what he's thinking, he doesn't want to do it. Yet still in all, it's chitzonius halev, chitzonius hanefesh. It's the external part of the person, because deep down, everyone wants to do what Hashem wants. So we see even amira, even what goes on in a person's thought, what they consciously think they want is not truly who they are. That's the main point what the Rebbe is going to bring out over here in this bracket. So keep track of where we're going with this. So the Rebbe starts on line 4. Like to explain in the Rambam the reason for the halacha, that one is able to coerce someone until he says, I want to do this particular action. The truth is, the reason why he's not doing it is because his Yetzer Hara was the one that coerced him not to do what it says in the Torah to do. Therefore, he wants and he desires to do an Aveda. But the true will, in the innermost part of his soul, not his conscious thought, in his subconscious, of every single Yid is to do according to the will of above. What does coercion help? We nullify that Yetzer Hara that is coercing him to go against who he really is. And the will that he thinks he wants because the Yetzer Hara coerced him. And now he's going to do through the coercion what he desires to do in the depth of his soul. So what's this whole proof? To bring that even Amira, in other words, even what a person consciously thinks to themselves, is also not necessarily what's going on inside. We see with our senses, that he's saying, I do not want, before he's coerced. It's not in such a way that his heart is feeling one thing, and his mouth is saying something else. In other words, his mouth is saying, I don't want, and his heart is saying, I do want. No. He can't believe by Leiratzalasis, because also in his heart he didn't want to do it. Skip the parentheses to line 15. This saying, this inner conversation is coming from the external part of the heart. But in the inner part of his heart, he always wants to do what the will of Hashem is. Let's get back to the original point. The original point is that dibur, when we use the term dibur or amira, this is chitzonius hanefesh. As opposed to Haggadah, he says in line 17, Mash'enkin Haggadah, as opposed to the word Haggadah. Shibah mepnimis halev, it comes from the inner part of the heart. V'zeu mashakasav bazoyar, she'Haggadah hainu milin dechachmasa. This is what it says in Zoyar, that Haggadah are matters of wisdom. So the Rebbe is going to bring this in to the idea that we know there are three things, and each one of those three things, Kabbalah says, the Zohar says, has the Pnimius and has the Chitzonius. The Torah has the Pnimius HaTorah, the inner part of the Torah, or the concealed part of the Torah, and there's the revealed part of the Torah. A Yid also has the inner part of his soul, like we said before, every Yid inside, deep down, wants to do what's right, and then there's the outer part of his soul. And then there's the same thing, the concealed part of Hashem, the inner part of Hashem, and the revealed part of Hashem. And when we study the inner part of the Torah, so that reveals the inner part of our soul and connects us with the inner part of Hashem, and this is all encapsulated in the idea of Haggadah, which shows on the inner part of the Torah, and the inner part of the Neshama, and the inner part of Hashem. Let's see it inside. So he says, line 18 again. This is what it says in Zohar. Haggadah are matters of wisdom, or words of wisdom. The idea of words of wisdom, which is the inner part and the concealed part of the Torah. They awaken and reveal the inner part and the concealed part of the neshama. That's why we learn with people Chassidus, even though they may not have studied anything else, but we learn with them Tanya, and even though they may not even be completely yet doing every single part of Torah mitzvahs the way it's supposed to be. Because just that is what's necessary to awaken the inner part of the soul, which is in a state of concealment at the moment. So too, it's when Hashem does Haggadah. Shepirusha, what does it mean by Hashem? That he has Haggadah. Hamshachas pnimius oirin saf begilu. It's the drawing down of the inner part of the infinite light of Hashem, that instead of it being concealed, it should come down in a revealed way. Like we had in the previous statement of the Chazal, Shaydei limud Haggadah, through the study of Agadah, the stories in the Gemara, etc., the ethical teachings in the Gemara, Meloshain Haggadah, the word Agadah is the word Haggadah. You recognize Hashem. Why is it that you recognize Hashem more in the stories than you recognize it by learning the halachas of Shabbos, for example? Because Nagada, which is the inner part of the Torah, it shines and becomes revealed from the inner part and the concealed part of Hashem. Now it's understood why the word Agida tells us that Yaakov Avinu wanted to be magid, meaning he wanted to communicate to his children, he wanted to reveal to his children a very deep idea, something that was not available, if you will, and not revealed beforehand. Kates Hayamin, the end of days. What's the idea of the end of days? The revelation of the ultimate concealed and the innermost concealed level. Gilui Sasim the Neshama. He was going to reveal the concealed part of the Neshama, V'Sasim the Kutrabrichu, and the concealed part of Hashem. And how was he going to communicate this? They Sasim Deraisa through the concealed part of the Torah. Now we're going to talk about that was all nice and good from Yaakov's perspective, but Hashem didn't want that seemingly. What was going on? So he says in Ois Gimel, line 4, this was all according to Yaakov's vision and what Yaakov saw. Seeing his sons, the way they were in his level. He was looking at his sons like that they were on the same level like he was. He thought that they are worthy. After an appropriate preparation, that he is able to reveal to them the end. And the Rebbe says, Yaakov Avinu made the same calculation when it came to his brother Esav. How much more so when it came to his children? Where do we see that he made a similar calculation by Esav? So he says in the brackets on line 7, how much more so from the fact that he thought, Esav, he thought even concerning Esav, Shekvar Nizbar, that Esav was already refined. Therefore the redemption could already come. He said, I had a shoyer and a chamoyer. So the Chazal say, what's the chamoyer? He had a chamoyer. This is going on King Mashiach that's riding on the donkey. In other words, Yaakov Avinu was communicating, we're ready, let's do it, let's bring Mashiach already. So if Yaakov Avinu was looking at Esav in his perspective and his level, so surely when he was going to look at his own children, he believed that they were holding by the Geul already. That's what he said. Hey, Asfu Vagida lachem, gather and I will tell you, kasher tis asfu, when you all gather. So first of all, he says parenthetically, including the gathering and refining of the sparks. But vitis achtu, when you will be united, that's the other idea of tisasfu, you will come together. Then I will reveal to you, as kates hayamin ba'achris hayamim, I will reveal to you the end of days, at the end of, like it says the pasuk, ba'achris hayamim. That was from Yaakov Avinu's perspective. But from the perspective of the state and situation of the children of Yaakov themselves, they were unworthy of it because they were on a lower level than the level of Yaakov. So the Rebbe says that this is evident also from what the Chazal say about what took place. Like it's understood from the continuation of the Chazal that we said right away at the beginning of the Maimer. What happened? Yaakov Avinu stopped telling it because the Shechina departed from him. So when Yaakov saw that, what's going on over here? Beforehand, the Shechina was with me. Now I want to reveal this great thing to my children. The Shechina left me. So he doubted now his view of his children. Amar, listen what the Medrash says. He said, perhaps amongst my children there's something that's defective and blemished and so on, and that's why I'm not able to communicate. His children told him, don't get so terribly worried. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, Yisrael. Yaakov Avinu was called Yisrael. Hashem, our God, Hashem is one. Amru, and they said to Yaakov, Kishem shein belibcha le'echad, just like in your heart, in Yaakov Avinu's heart, you don't have any other gods, only one God. Kach ein b'lebeinu le'echad. The Chazal go on to say that they told him, they assured him, don't worry, in our heart there's also one. Yet, when you say the word kishem, just as, so, that means it's not exactly the same. Line 22, kishem kach. The very fact that they said just like, so too, with a chaf that indicates that it's similar, but similarity is not identical. It's understood they were lower than the level of Yaakov. So it wasn't as severe as Yaakov now suspected, that they were blemished and chas v'shalom not having appropriate thoughts and belief in Hashem. No, it wasn't that bad. But they were still not on the level of Yaakov, and therefore they weren't worthy yet that Yaakov Avinu could bring down this innermost level of the Torah, and the innermost level of the Shekhinah, and the innermost level of their souls to be revealed in a way of the end of days. And now the Rebbe brings in also a very interesting expression that it says. So he says on line 24, according to this, we can explain the exact language of the Gemara, Nistalka memenu Shechina. The Shechina left him. It doesn't say that the end was all of a sudden concealed from him, that he forgot when the end is. Or it was closed off from him. The meaning of the expression of the language Shechina, like many times the Rebbe brings down the Chassidus, and this is in the Basiligani Mamorim, Al Shem Sheshechenes Umislabeshes, because it rests and it becomes enclosed. It's settled in below. Moira Alam Shachalamat, it indicates that it's being drawn down below. So V'zeu shenistalka memenu, what left Yaakov, Mashuhu ba'is sham mevaker shgal saketz v'banav, that he at that time wanted to reveal the end to his children. So what was missing was hayicholes lahashkin be'inyan zeh gilei haketz lamata. He had it, but he didn't have the Shechina component. He couldn't make it rest down here below. He couldn't make a home for it below. He couldn't draw down that revelation of the end down here into this world. This means upon Yaakov himself, the Shechina did rest upon him. The revelation of Hashem's infinite state. Even after it says Nistalka memenu Shechina. How do we know? Because he kept on saying Nevuah. Immediately afterwards, he said many items of prophecy. For that, the Shechina has to settle. Also, the end itself was not concealed from him. Only the Shechina left him, meaning Inyan Agilu Lamata, the revelation down here below, shall bechinas haketz of the end. Shezeu akoyach lahashkin lahamshach gilei haketz lamata, the capability to make settle and to draw down the revelation of the end down here below, that left him. So, and despite the fact that it was because of his children, it's something that occurred to him. The Rebbe is going to be medayik. What was it about him, about Yaakov then? So it should have been more about the children were unworthy. Why is it nistalka mimenu Shechina? So he says in line 12, Afal became Yachsim Chachamenu Zal Inyan Zal Yaakov. Still in all, the Chachamim relate this to Yaakov be'amram, by saying nistalka mimenu Shechina. The Shechina left him. After l'chura areza inyan shenagel rak l'shvatim, though this is a matter that only concerns the shvatim. V'havle l'meimar shaloi hoyu banav zakayim l'kach. The Chazal should have said he wanted to tell them the end of days, but his children were unworthy of it. Why? Or some similar language. Why did they say the Shechina left him? He was okay. He was in the correct place. So the Rebbe continues in line 16, the very fact that his children were unworthy of the revelation of the end. Paul, Yerida Gamboy, this affected a descent and lowering in Yaakov in himself. Similar to what we find concerning Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem told him, go descend from your greatness. It says that after the Chet HaEgel, when Moshe Rabbeinu was still in Shamayim, Hashem told him, go descend. And the Chazal say, what does it mean, go descend? Go descend from your greatness. And they explain, Klum nasati l'cha gedula ella b'shvil Yisrael. Did I not give you your greatness only for the sake of the Yidden? Since the Jewish people are not appropriate and not the way they're supposed to be, this cause of descent also in Moshe. So we find that the Yidden's descent impacted Moshe. In a similar vein, the Shvatim's descent, the Shvatim not being able to receive this because they were not on the level of Yaakov, caused the descent by Yaakov. But it was only at the time, not earlier than that. The Rebbe moves in both ways. Look at line 21. This descent that the Shechina left him, it was only took place after Hashem chose to reveal to them the end. Though even before that, they were in such a state and situation that they were not worthy for the end to become revealed to them. So, how come? Why, if Yaakov's children affected in him a descent, so why was it only at the time that he was going to share it with them? So he says in line 25, the reason for that is, when Yaakov was removed from an association and a thought about their spiritual state, so their spiritual state did not touch and influence Yaakov to lower him. It's only when Yaakov desired to reveal to them the end, then he has a connection and an association with their and a bond with their spiritual state that he's trying to connect with. So then their state also influenced Yaakov Avinu, that the Shechina left from him. And the Rebbe is going to go on with the comparison to Moshe Rabbeinu. Similar to what we find about Moshe Rabbeinu. By his ascent to the mountain, he was removed from all matters down here below. He had no bond and no connection with the world and all of its matters. Therefore, the action of the golden calf did not touch him and did not affect and influence his state and level. Though he knew about it by hearing about it, he heard about it from Hashem, that Hashem let him know that they made a golden calf. When he actually descended from the mountain, and afterwards he actually saw the golden calf, then the matter touched him until his hands became heavy. Moshe became angered. He threw from his hands the luchos. Now the Rebbe is, as usual, always wants to end and conclude with a positive. What's the positive note of this? The Rebbe says anything in Torah, and in many places the Rebbe points out anything that tzaddikim like Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to accomplish, surely was accomplished, and it was not for naught. Line 6, Ois Dalet. Since this idea that gather, and I will tell you, was written in the Torah, Yisrael was given to all the Jewish people. Moving, it's understood, Paul Surely the desire that Yaakov had to reveal the end, it had its influence even down here below. The influence is that it's part of Torah. Torah is a lesson, and Torah is everlasting. So it's an everlasting lesson. That means it has its influence down here below. And even if it wasn't part of Torah, like we know, even without the idea that it became part of Torah, the Chazal teach us that what tzaddikim request is never refused. It's always going to be fulfilled. So therefore, it must be that Yaakov's wanting that it should influence this world did influence this world. And he's going to again go back to Moshe Rabbeinu, but not the case of the Chet HaEgel, but a different case where we see that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted something, Hashem seemingly refused, and still in all, we teach that he got his wishes to a certain degree. So he says at the end of line 11, it's similar to what we find concerning Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he says, parenthetically, according to Kabbalah, that Moshe and Yaakov are related. According to Kabbalah, Moshe is the inside level of what Yaakov is the external level. Let's skip the parentheses to line 14. Through his tefillah, that he begged Hashem, he davened Hashem, let me cross, please, and see the land. And Chassidus explains, ve'eres ha'aretz meant that he wanted that Yidden should have a level of perception of godliness akin to vision and seeing. So, b'chdei lifov bnei Yisrael in Hariyah Belakus. The reason why he wanted to cross the Yarden and go into Eretz Yisrael, because by doing so, he would influence that the Yidden's appreciation of Hashem would be on a level of sight. Though he himself did not enter Eretz Yisrael, so one would think that his request was refused, and he did not influence the Yidden the way he wanted to influence them, that they should be able to have a vision of godliness. Still in all, the Chassidus teaches, he influenced that the level of vision in the Yidden should be in a transcendent way, not in a way that permeates them. In a way that they are aware of and conscious of, they only had the level of hearing and understanding godliness. Like the continuation of after the Moshe recalling his back and forth with Hashem about begging to go into Eretz Yisrael. It says, "Va'ati Yisrael shma lachukim goymer." Now Yidden listen to the chukim. But in the transcendent level, he also drew down in them the level of vision. So the point of this entire thing is to say, even though Moshe wanted something, and we see that Hashem refused him, still in all, to a certain degree, Moshe's wishes were fulfilled. So the Rebbe is going to say the same thing over here by Yaakov, even though it seems to be that Yaakov's wishes to draw down and reveal the end down here, to reveal the most innermost levels down here below, seemingly was that capability was removed from him. Still in all, the Rebbe says in line 22, similarly one can say concerning Yaakov, in a time that was close to his passing, and the Rebbe says in the footnote, or similar to Moshe Rabbeinu doing the same thing close to his passing, that he had this conversation with Hashem about entering Eretz Yisrael. Though the Shechina left Yaakov, that's what he said, come, collect and listen, hear the children of Yaakov. Similarly, only hearing, not the vision of the Geula. Still in all, through Yaakov stating, collect yourselves, gather yourselves, and I will tell you. He empowered his sons, and to their children following throughout all generations, until the end of days, that with their avodah, they will attain the revelation of the end in a transcendent way, just like Moshe Rabbeinu caused that the Yidden should have a transcendent revelation of godliness, which is, what is it? The revelation of the end in a transcendent way. Avodas Hashem b'ofen shel cherus. When a person serves Hashem in a way of freedom from the Yetzer Hara, which Chazal say, what's it mean, cherus? That a person is freed from the nations of the world, he's freed from the Yetzer Hara. The Rebbe says, we could say, Shazel Masha Kosav Rashi, this is what Rashi wrote, V'hischil oymar dvarim acherim. He wanted to tell him the end, but he began to say other things. This comes as a continuation to what he wanted to reveal the end. What Avraham Avinu wanted to reveal, he inserted it, he embedded it into other things, like he disguised it and hid it away. In the collect and hear, through that they will come to the revelation of the end.